My name is Adam, or Half Kiwi here on YouTube, and I, like many others, have a keen interest in tracing my family history. Since I started my family tree, I've been able to research thousands of family members, some with fascinating stories such as royal encounters, secret families on the other side of the planet, and even mysterious unsolved rural murders. But beyond all of that, there is one mystery that rules them all. The story of my great-great-grandmother, Hester, and her partner, whose identity she never shared, even with her own daughter, and eventually took to her grave. This is the closest family member to me whose identity was never known. But over the last 2 years, I have been on a mission to solve this 100-year-old mystery, and finally bring some closure to this gap in my family tree. Today I want to share this journey, of me trying to find the identity of this mysterious great-grandfather, and to appeal for help through expertise or more DNA. A quick disclaimer. Even if absolutely nobody sees this video, I still have an obligation to protect the identity of anyone alive today. Therefore, I will use fake names or pseudonyms throughout this video and hide any layers of family trees which contain still living members. Let's begin with a story. Alberta Hester Smith, or Hester as she went by, was born the middle child of a poor and devoutly religious family in Twerton, near Bath, England, in 1876. They lived in poor housing in Twerton, and at the time quite industrial part of Bath with many mills and textile manufacturers. Hester's father, Job, was the sole income earner, working in the coal mines to feed a family of 9. In this family, once you reached 12, you were fit for work, and none of her siblings did any schooling past this age. By the 1891 census, when Hester is 14, she is working as a staymaker in a manufactory, with a stay being a variation of a woman's corset that was popular at the time. Her life remained this way for the next 2.5 decades. While the rest of her siblings either died or married and moved out, Hester and her older sister Annie never married, and thus, as single women in a religious family, never left home. The both of them continued to live with their parents as dressmakers in many of the local textile manufactories such as W&R Cook Limited on the left there. In April 1916, just a month after her 40th birthday, Hester's life would take a sudden turn, and it started with the death of her father. Within a year, her mother would join him, and 6 months after the death of her parents, Hester would have her first and only child with an unknown man. This child is my great-grandmother. Notice I said she had her child 6 months after the death of her parents. What this means is, whoever the father was, he was around at this tumultuous time, with the probable conception event occurring right in between the death of her father and mother. Was she waiting for her father to die? Was this man in the picture for much longer, but kept a secret because of her father's disapproval? At this time, it is good time to make an initial profile of this man. What do we know about him? First, this man was almost certainly born 10 years either side of 1880. Based on the appearance of my great-grandmother, he was likely British, or at least definitely white European. Finally, the only other thing we know is that, given Hester was a poor, quiet lady in her 40s who was looking after an elderly mother, he was living in or visiting Bath in the final quarter of 1916, so October, November, or December of that year. This is our starting point. This is all we know, other than a family rumor that the father was a soldier who died in the First World War. The first key to unlocking this mystery was to get the closest living relative of this unknown man to do a DNA test. Thankfully, my relative was more than happy to give me access to their DNA results, and so here is where we start. Just for fun, I included my own actual DNA origins map on the left there. As you can see, it's about as boring as you can get. I am incredibly genetically British, to the point where it's actually surprising just how British I am. Like, where's the Irish? Note that as we go forward, whenever I discuss DNA matches, I am referring to a family member's DNA match, not my own. And that this DNA is from the granddaughter of the man we are searching for. I hope this is clear enough going forward. All in all, with their blessing, I put my relatives' DNA results into the databases of Ancestry, MyHeritage, Living DNA, GEDmatch, and Family Tree DNA. My initial strategy was to simply build out the family trees of each DNA match, either using the family tree that they had already built on their profile, or building it for them when a tree was not there. The idea was that, because of prior research, I already know all my ancestors other than this mystery man. If I build out a DNA matches tree to include the farthest possible common ancestor and still can't find a connection, then it must correlate to this gap in information. It must correlate to my missing grandfather. In practice, this meant going through the Ancestry DNA match results list one by one and building out or using each of their family trees. As soon as I can make a connection to my known family, they can be disregarded, as they do not relate to the unknown man. If I can't find a connection, then I may be onto something. Let's go through some of the interesting DNA matches that I found. The first of the DNA matches was an older lady living in Canada, who I am going to nickname Eve, for being the first female match. She is a perfect example of my strategy. She came back as a second to third cousin match, meaning that, assuming the worst, I would have to build out her tree to a great-great-grandparent level to find the furthest common ancestor. In doing this, I very quickly found the Smiths, the family of Hester, meaning that she did not relate to the mystery man and could be disregarded. The next match, however, was a lot more interesting. For the purposes of this video, I will call her Dorothy, as much like Dorothy from The Wizard of Oz, she was empathetic and kind, and always eager to help me out on my journey. Thank you, Dorothy. I spent a very long time researching Dorothy's family, all the way out to the great-great-grandparent level, by which point there, genetically speaking, must be a common ancestor between us. However, not a single recognizable name could be found, even when I revised and rebuilt the entire tree for mistakes. This means that somewhere in this family tree, our mystery man might be hiding. The third of these is a lady I will call Leia, for reasons you are about to see. She ended up being such a close match that we share a last name. Despite both being born in the same part of England, sharing last names, and being third cousins, we've both managed to move across the world all the way to New Zealand, where she now lives a 20-minute drive from my house. How crazy is that? Unfortunately, as you might be able to tell from our shared last name, she does not relate to this mystery man, and it is very easy to fit her into my existing family tree on the paternal side. For this next person, I will do something I said I wouldn't, and actually reveal their identity. I'm doing this as I would argue that this person is already a public figure. His name is Mikhail Sean Colville Anderson, a notable Danish-Canadian urban designer and urban mobility expert. He is, as a third cousin, likely my closest living relative with a Wikipedia page. And in building out his family, I found that he is a Smith, meaning that he is related through Hester's line of the family, and therefore also closely related to Eve. Finally, we get to the closest DNA match I have ever found, even to this day, a man I will call Forrest, after Forrest Gump, as despite being a somewhat reluctant figure in this story, he has, in just existing, led to all the major breakthroughs. Forrest was such a close DNA match that he came back as a second cousin or half-second cousin. He lived in Australia and was likely born in the 1940s, meaning he may not be alive today. His only information was his own name and the name and date of birth of his parents, one Robert Thomas Frederick and Elizabeth Ruby. This was, at first, all I knew about Forrest, but before long, his identity would come to play a pivotal role. For this next stage of our mystery, I need to get building the family trees of all of these DNA matches. This was a tedious, long, but necessary stage in the investigation. I employed a technique that I like to call common ancestor matching. The simple idea is, go through each DNA match and build out their family tree, only considering those that are not found to be an obvious link to my known family, as I described earlier. At the same time, I keep a tally of every individual I have come across, and look for any point where individuals repeat across trees. As a programmer, this was my first time I was able to use my technical skills to aid my journey, using Python to analyze the family trees and find individuals who could be the same person. Before long, I had nearly 30 fully fleshed out family trees of close DNA matches that didn't link to any known family member. This is when I would stumble across one family tree that would change everything. As I went through my DNA matches, I came across one DNA match who I will give the pseudonym Joan. after Joan of Arc. I hope this name conveys how truly important she was to this mystery, and just how much this one match changed the narrative of my investigation. Joan was a DNA match through my heritage, coming in as a respectable 1.1% shared DNA, likely a third or second cousin's daughter, or perhaps a fourth cousin. This wasn't incredibly close, but was certainly usable, and would mean that I would have to build the tree out to her 3 times great-grandparents, which is a decent amount of work. As I researched her family, I began to come across plenty of names that felt familiar. There were Taylors, Martins, Evans, Paynes, all these names that I'd seen quite a bit from other matches. There also seemed to be a higher prevalence of multiple marriages in this part of the family, which was linking these names together in ways I had not previously found. It was only a matter of time before I, for the first time, found another DNA match on the same tree. I found Forrest's father, Robert Thomas Frederick. And just like that, the dominoes began to fall. The more I researched Joan's tree, the more I connected tree after tree of previously researched DNA matches into one big picture. All in all, I've been able to place 10 matches on a single combined tree, all without a single recognizable member of my own family being found. I could now, for the first time ever, definitively say that one of the men on this tree was Grandfather X, our missing man. To this day, I am unsure about what exactly caused Joan's family to make everything fall into place. Perhaps it was bad luck that I had missed all the connections before, perhaps it was because of Jane's central position amongst all the other family trees, or perhaps it was because of the many multiple marriages that appear in Joan's family. Either way, the real-life Joan has absolutely no idea how important she and her tree have been to my family and this investigation. Thank you, Joan. I understand that this next section will get quite difficult to understand, so I will try to explain everything as clearly as possible. But if you are mathematically minded, you may have already realized that having multiple matches on the same tree is a superpower, and here's why. There are multiple techniques we can use here, and I will do my best to explain each simply and intuitively. The first and perhaps most intuitive of the techniques is what I'm going to call match cross-referencing. Imagine you have a DNA match who comes back as a likely second cousin. You build out their family tree to the great-grandparent level, as this would be the common ancestor of a second cousin, but don't recognize any of their ancestors. While this person is a second cousin, you don't know the link, and this is essentially what we have in Joan of Arc's tree and my own family. Now imagine you get another match who is also a likely second cousin. You build out their family tree all the way to the great-grandparent level, like before, only this time there is a common set of ancestors between your two matches. In this heavily simplified case, being able to place the two matches on a single tree has conclusively shown who your ancestor is, and you now know exactly where you fit into this tree. While it would be nice if my task was that simple, the example I just gave is of course a gross oversimplification of what I had to do. But the same basic principle persists. For a start, DNA matches don't ever come back as a definite second cousin or third cousin. Based on the amount of shared DNA, there are a number of possibilities, each with their own statistical likelihoods. For example, the relationship probabilities between my relative and Forrest look as follows. With these statistics, and bear with me here, I can take the combined likelihood of an ancestor and go and apply it to all of their descendants on their actual family tree. This means I can go to my big combined tree and assign 39.4% to Forrest's great-grandparents and their descendants, 56.1% to Forrest's great-grandparents and any of their descendants who haven't already got a percentage, and so on. It may help to see this on the actual tree. Here, I have highlighted all plausible individuals, that is, men of feasible age. In yellow are those that descend from Forrest's great-great-grandparents, and in red are those who are more closely related, being descendants of his great-grandparents. I then collated these stats into a big spreadsheet to track them. If I do the exact same thing from Joan's perspective, because I have Joan and Forrest on the same tree, I only need to consider the overlap, that is, men who are possible for both Joan and Forrest. Doing this with all DNA matches helps me build a much better picture of the tree. Firstly, I can reduce the number of possible men from nearly 400 to just 26. Secondly, we can average the percentages for all individuals, showing average likelihoods based on these probabilities. Let's take a quick breather here. What have I done so far? In short, I've used the overlapping relatives from having multiple DNA matches on the same family tree to very quickly narrow down the pool of possible men. At each step of this process, I've also been getting a better and better picture of the statistical likelihood of each remaining possible man based on the relationship to each DNA match. Another technique I used is to try a proof by assumption. This can be quite time-consuming if you have a large pool of possible men, but after using the technique before, I had a small enough pool to make this work. In this method, I go through each of the possible men remaining and say, let's assume that this guy is the correct man. This assumption would mean that my relative fits in exactly here, and we can infer the true relationships between my relative and all the matches in this supposed reality. The question then is, does this theoretical truth align with what we see in the DNA results? Running this perspective on every single one of the 26 possible men left over showed that nearly all of the remaining men were very unlikely from the perspective of one match or another. For each of the eliminated men, I could now say, if we assume that, insert a match, is the true great-grandfather, then the relationship that this implies between my relative and the given DNA match is close to impossible. What is more notable about this method is that while many potential men had at least one or two matches that lowered their likelihoods, there were 4 individuals that consistently had decent probabilities no matter whose perspective I looked from. The 4 men on your screen are the only individuals who are genetic possibilities for all DNA matches and who, given they were the correct ancestor, would create plausible relationships between my relative and all other DNA matches. These men represent 2 sets of brothers who share a set of grandparents, making them first cousins. They are each perfectly situated amongst a host of connected DNA matches to be the men we're looking for. But who actually are they? Now is a good time to return to our initial profile. This man should ideally be born 10 years either side of 1880, be white British, and in the Bath area in the final quarter of 1916. There is also that family rumour that the man was a World War I soldier. So after all of this investigation, which only considered the DNA matches and statistics, do the men we're left with even fit the bill? We could have been left with absolutely anybody, so do our initial assumptions and the men we have now stack up? Note that, while I have tried to be thorough in my research, there is always a chance of error, and it would be irresponsible of me to not address this. There are many cases of people with the same name, born around the same time, doing similar things, and it can be hard to distinguish between these individuals, but I've spent literally years going over everything previously mentioned, and I'm constantly reflecting on how things can be done better. This is exactly why I've spent so many years tackling this one problem. That being said, I have good news. Not only is every single one of these men a white British male, but 3 out of the 4 brothers were World War I soldiers, meaning there is suddenly a very good chance that this family rumour is actually true. When I first reflected on how accurate the initial profile had been, I was actually blown away. The oldest of these 4 men is one Francis Walter Payne, born in April 1882 in Bedminster, now part of Bristol, which is a 25-minute drive from where Hester was living. He boarded around Bristol as a young man, living with various families and trying to make a living, but never settling down. On September 2nd, 1914, he travelled to Taunton to join the Somerset Light Infantry. He was discharged just 3 weeks later, as he was deemed, and I quote, not likely to become an efficient soldier. He had not passed a single class in his time. On his discharge notice, he was sent back to live with his sister Emily in Cantle, where he was living until at least 1914. Unfortunately, there is no further record of Francis, and I am unsure exactly when he died. While there are several sources of people who could be him, there is nothing I can say for sure. Because I have his full military record, I do have his full physical description and medical examination form. From this I can tell you he was 5'8", or 176 centimeters, and weighed 171 pounds or 77 kilos. He had dark brown hair, blue eyes with 2 scars on his right shin, and a mole on the left side of his knee. Unfortunately, I think it is clear to say that Francis Walter likely suffered from some form of arrested development. It is evident from the writing on his military forms that he struggled to, or perhaps was unable to read and write. Additionally, his physical description seemed rather healthy, suggesting that his inability to serve in the military and failure to pass any classes was due to a shortfall in mental acuity rather than physical. Next of the four is Francis's younger brother, William Ernest Payne. William was born in 1884, also in Bedminster. Instead of making his way around boarders' homes in Bristol, William joined the Somerset Light Infantry at Taunton in 18 years old, just like his brother, and worked as a cook at the major army installment there. While I am unsure of how long he worked there, I know that he was living in Bath by 1939, living very close to Hester, working as a gardener and claiming a pension for service in the army. He would die in Bath in 1950 at the age of 66, and lived on Cleverton Street, just a 6-minute drive from Hester. The next youngest, and the first of the other set of brothers, is Joseph Henry Payne. He would have been the first cousin of Francis and William. Born in 1887 in Cantle, Joseph would, much like his cousins, go into the military, joining the Navy at 18 years old, where he would serve on many ships, both prior to and throughout the First World War. Importantly, it appears he was on shore during the period where my great-grandmother would have to have been conceived. Specifically, he had moved from on water to being stationed at HMS Vivid Seamanship Training School in Devonport. During this time, it seems he was a naughty boy indeed, spending 7 days in the cells in 1915, 5 in 1918, and so on. Despite this, he always managed to get a satisfactory grade in his yearly character assessments. As a side note, a lot of these records are awfully difficult to read, so if you're a bit of an expert on these documents or good at reading old handwriting, let me know what you think some of these could mean in the comments below, or get in touch through my channel email. All the help is greatly appreciated. A smoking gun with Joseph is that the absence I mentioned in 1916 was exactly when we need him to be absent. Namely, we need him up north getting his game on with old Hester. By the 1921 census, Joseph's party days were finally done, and he is settled down with a wife and kids in Bristol. He would pass away in 1936, at the relatively young age of 48. Finally, we get to the youngest of the four, Joseph's younger brother Albert. This youngest brother is, in my opinion, by far the least likely of the four men. For a start, he was born in 1893, which is outside of the range I gave in my initial profile. Secondly, records on Albert are very difficult to come by. There are two Albert Paynes who are the right age and born in the right place in the 1911 census. One is a patient in Bristol Eye Hospital, and the other is boarding as a rail worker in Derbyshire. Whichever one he is, it doesn't place him anywhere near Hester. In the 1939 census, he might be a dairy farmer in Sodbury or a labourer in West Dean, but in reality, the lack of and inconsistency of any credible documentation on this guy strongly suggests to me that, unfortunately, he either died quite young or had some disability that stopped him living independently. My current line of investigation, and the only way to separate these two sets of brothers genetically, is through their mothers. If I can find descendants of William Phillips Cantle and Caroline Frankham, or David Fry and Eliza Saunders, who are a DNA match to my relative, then I know which of the two brothers it is. To that end, if you believe you may be able to help, if you know anyone who is a relative of these families, or just have any insight, DNA, anything, please do let me know. When I began to embark on this journey, I asked my relative what she knew of her grandfather. She told me it was very little, only that her mother was the product of a weekend fling, and the father was a soldier who died in the First World War. Now we can say for sure that Hester is out partying in Bath on a chilly evening, late 1916. This is when arrives one of our military Payne brothers. Perhaps Joseph Henry, absent from port to visit his parents in Cantle and finding entertainment in the pubs of Bath. Or perhaps William Ernest, the cook, off from the military base in Taunton and visiting the city he would soon call home. Even perhaps Francis, our failed soldier, living with his older sister in Cantle and off for some fun in the city. Whoever it was that fateful night, a child was conceived. A child who was raised by a single mother who never once told of her father's identity. A child who started her own loving family with a successful local businessman for a husband and two caring and hard-working children. Thank you for making it all the way to this point in the video. If you are an expert in any of the areas discussed here, or have any insight at all as to where I should search and what I could be doing, please let me know via the comments of this video or the email on my account. The search is a big challenge and perhaps forever ongoing, so I need all the help I can get. If you believe you may be related to the Saunders-Fry or Cantle-Frankham families and have done a DNA test, please get in touch. That information could be vital. Thanks again. This was Half Kiwi.